Today we have Josh from AHA Research. He does win-loss interviews and works specifically with product marketers. So I'm super interested to jump into all sorts of questions about research, product marketing, the whole kind of spectrum of what you work on. So Josh, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. I'm also really excited to chat about all things research and otherwise. So let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. So first off, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? I want to get into where you're working, but can you tell us actually just about your background as a researcher? So, how did you get into research? Kind of what roles have you been in? And then maybe we can talk about where you're at now.
Yeah, I mean it's funny whenever I speak to people that are in research, I'm amazed at the diversity of backgrounds and experiences and how people got to research. It's always really interesting to have that conversation. So for me, I guess it's more of a traditional route. So I studied marketing as part of my master's. As part of that, there was a number of marketing strategy units, and inclusive in that was research, customer research specifically. So I loved um, I loved being able to ground strategy, specifically marketing strategy, in data and insights. And I think that was kind of my first real exposure to true customer research. I'd done surveys in the past, but that was really the first time on the other side as me as the researcher. I don't want to say it was love at first sight, but it was certainly, I think, a really eye-opening introduction into the world of and the possibilities that research brings to marketing and all other kind of disciplines in business. So I moved from there into the corporate world, and I moved into a pretty traditional market research type role. So it was like surveys, NPS surveys, voice of the customer surveys, brand tracking surveys, focus groups. It was very old school market research. And as much as I enjoyed that, I think I missed the human element of research, which was what I was enjoying initially in those university electives. So I pretty quickly moved into more qualitative research roles, and I guess that's kind of where I stayed for the following 7 years up until now. Really, is research-led roles, and those roles have been in product teams, as product lead or product strategist. It's been in marketing roles. It's been in kind of like new product development and like innovation roles, but research has always been the centerpiece of my role. It's always been a research-led role. I moved over to the US and spent a number of years in the US. I'm originally from Australia, and I was working in consulting side over there, working for companies like Google and Facebook and Novartis, and helping them bring products to market and grow. Again, leaning into my research background to do so. So it's not. I haven't always been in a research, I guess, only role. It's been research-led roles, is how I like to think about it, and that's why I think my point of difference to a lot of people is that I have that experience and I'm able to blend it with product marketing, innovation, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of like my background and how I got into research. I'm happy to talk about AHA Research as part of that, but that's kind of how I got into research and how it's played a part in my life.
Well, I think that is a great segue into what you're doing at AHA, and I just wanted to highlight uh, kind of the versatility that it sounds like you bring, where uh, you haven't been in just a strict research role, but you've really kind of worked across product development, product innovation, and then you also have a background in marketing, and so it really sounds like you can kind of pull on these. We'd like to think of them as very disparate, but they're actually all very interconnected kind of disciplines to form a very cohesive perspective for product marketers. So I'd love to hear how you're kind of drawing on all these areas of experience at AHA Research.
Yeah. So for me, I think a lot, especially over the last couple of years, I was working with a lot of go-to-market teams in my role as a consultant in the US, and so product marketing, sales leaders, working with them, and I think I saw a really big opportunity to help those teams uh, be better in their own roles by leveraging customer and buyer research. Um, a lot of product marketers and sales people aren't don't have, I guess, like research as a skill set that they've had the fortune to be able to develop. Or product marketing, I'd suggest it probably isn't. Marketing, yes, but a lot of people like research kind of fall into product marketing from a number of different fields, and so they might not have the luxury of knowing how to do customer research. And the same for sales, right? There's not necessarily a whole lot of sales degrees from my understanding, but and sales are often focusing very much on the seller's side of things, on the buyer's side of things, and so very hard for them to get into the, I guess, like the headspace of the buyer sometimes. Not to say they can't, because they do often do a good job of that, but they're inherently selling, and it's just hard for them to sometimes get out of that mindset. So for me, I saw a huge, I guess, need, and there was a significant shift in the market to go from, I guess, growing at all costs to growing sustainably. And to me, you can't grow sustainably without truly understanding who your buyers are and what they care about. And so a lot of the work that I was doing over the last couple of years was, I guess, upfront, conducting research upfront in the buyer's journey, and in what happens from the moment these buyers have a first thought that something in their life needs to change, all the way through to making a decision to purchase a solution or not. There's a lot of things that dominoes that need to fall in that process, and there are a lot of unknowns. Whenever I spoke to these customer facing go to market teams, there's a lot of guesswork that happens by virtue of the fact that they don't have the skill set to go and speak to the customers to unearth some of these insights and to get clarity. They don't have the time. They don't have buy-in, or any number of these things. So what I decided to do was, I guess, fill a gap in that market and specialize in what is called win-loss interviews. And for those that don't know win-loss interviews, it's essentially using in the B2B software space, using your closed won and lost opportunities, deals that you've won and lost, to learning from those opportunities by understanding from the buyer's perspective what worked and what didn't. And yes, sales teams collect some data on that. Same with kind of product marketers, but they often rely on what the sales team says. But it's not comprehensive at all, and so there's a lot of assumptions that are baked into this, and so that's where I felt like I could fill a need in the market, and helping product teams and sales leaders really identify what are those obstacles, learn from their mistakes, and ultimately, and I guess what they pay me for is to figure out how to improve win rates, which means more revenue and more importantly, more sustainable revenue as well. So that's kind of how AHA Research was born, and I guess it was a very natural continuation of what I was doing. Customer research is quite a broad spectrum of quite a broad discipline. Can mean many things, right from acquisition all the way through to retention and anything in between. I've essentially chosen to focus on a very specific part of the journey, which is acquisition, and helping teams do better in that part of the journey.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And I actually wanted to go back to one thing you said kind of early in your answer there, which was it sounds like you've seen that teams have been embracing kind of this grow at all costs, or I should say, businesses have been pursuing this kind of grow at all costs mentality, and you're helping them shift in your work from grow at all costs to sustainable growth. So I wanted to see if we could just talk a little bit more about that, because that's super interesting to me. In that, I think there's an interesting connection between understanding your customer at a deeper level and having a
Yeah.
more sustainable business. So I'd love to hear you just kind of take us through, like, what does what does growing at all costs with maybe a poor understanding of your customer look like versus once you understand your customer better?
Yeah, I mean, growing at all costs to me is just, uh, I guess, trying to. It's taking shots in the dark and pouring money into trying to acquire companies without truly understanding, firstly, and I guess most importantly, who your best fit customers are. Um, and then trying to find more of those best fit customers. I think what a lot of companies end up falling into the trap of doing is um, acquiring any customer that comes their way, whether they're a good fit, a bad fit, or something in between. And while yes, that's revenue in the door up front, that has flow-on effects further on in the life cycle. You know, bad customers request features which are completely incongruent with your vision and your strategy. They require hand holding. They will most likely churn. All those types of things. Whereas the best fit customers, they understand and get what your product does. They are advocates for your product. They don't churn. They renew. They upgrade. And so I think it all starts with identifying and having a clear picture of who those best fit customers are, so that you can track more of them and repel the ones that you don't. Without that, win loss analysis isn't that effective, right? Because win loss analysis is about learning from your won and lost opportunities. Where win loss is effective is when you identify which of those won and lost opportunities fall into the bucket of your best fit customers, and which of them fall into the bucket of your poor fit customers. You don't want to go and learn from the types of customers that are never going to be a good fit anyway, right? Because they're going to give you learnings and data that are going to take your product, your go to market in the wrong direction. What you want to try and do is identify again your best fit customers, and then go and speak to people who have gone through the sales pipeline that fit that profile, so that you can learn from them, because they're the types of customers that you want to try and attract. And so to me, that's the difference between grow at all costs, take anything and everything, and being selective, but I guess more accurately, I guess, very intentional about who you're going after and who you're not going after. And to me, a sustainable approach is going after the right type of people and knowing exactly who that is.
If you see me smiling over here, it's because as a marketer who's also very close to product and very integrated within the sales process as well, I know what you mean. Let's say when you have people who are pulling you, say, in a direction that you weren't planning to go, you're probably not going to go, asking for features that are totally coming out of left field. And so I can say from personal experience, I understand deeply the the value of being able to identify who are those best fit customers, and then to your point, being able to double down on your understanding of them, versus yeah, maybe it was revenue coming in the door, like you said, but maybe not the best fit, maybe not the ones where you really want to spend a lot of your time trying to understand further.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's not to say you don't want to listen to that data and take it on board, but you just want to what is valuable and what is noise. And I think that's why research is so valuable, is because you have the opportunity to do that rather than just blindly following any and all data that comes through the door. That's not what I'm advocating for. So it's not to say that it's it's entirely bad data. Um, it just helps you make a decision. I guess that's what research is about, right? It helps you make decisions, and if you can do that, that's I guess ultimately what you're wanting to achieve.
Yeah. This is more just a question about your process, but I'm curious now, like when you work with a client and you're doing win loss for them, do you
Yeah,
have any say in who you're actually talking to? Because that seems like a really crucial variable, right? Like if they say, okay, Josh, we want to do win loss analysis, win loss interviews. We want to bring you in and we want you to talk to these customers. Do you ever say, wait a second, I'm not sure that these are actually the customers, you want to be talking to? Do you ever have to have that conversation?
I do. And look, it depends. There is sometimes really good reasons why people want to speak to specific types of customers, they were a warm lead from the CEO or whatever it might be. So so it for sure happens, and sometimes I'm willing to kind of like just let it slide. But many in many instances, it's about identifying two two things really: the best fit customers I talked about, and making sure that where they have a definition or even a broad definition of kind of what that looks like. Best fit customers, ICP, it's kind of all the same. But a definition of what that looks like, that's kind of like the broadest filter that I use. And then within that, it's also, okay, what is it that you're trying to understand? What objectives do you have? Because that determines also who's going to be relevant to speak to. As an example, if you're trying to understand uh, what why you're listening to a specific competitor, right? Like what is it about this specific competitor? Why are we constantly losing deals to them? Then you're only going to want to speak to specifically prospects that have also considered those competitors, right? There's no point going and speaking to someone in general who may or may not have spoken to that, also engaged that competitor. So being very purposeful there. Another example is if you're wanting to validate your own, I guess, features and your roadmap, then speaking to people who have successfully um, uh, signed signed deal to understand and looking at why that was so, that helps you validate features, right, as well. So you can actually look at why did actually people buy from us, what are the specific features that people said or mentioned were what got them over the line. And so yes, you could also speak to missed opportunities about like what was missing from the roadmap that made them go elsewhere. But my point is understanding what it is you're trying to achieve with research in general and with win loss interviews will help you pick exactly who you should go and speak to.
Got it. As you were talking about, features that got the customer over the line, got them to sign. It occurred to me, I would love to know if you had to sort of do win loss on your own practice as a researcher. Can you tell me kind of what are the things that get your clients over the line when it's time for them to come and talk to you and do win loss? So kind of, I guess what I'm getting at here is if you look at the folks you've worked with, what
Yeah.
was the trigger for saying like, you know what, we got to do this research? And then I'm asking less about kind of the marketing side of things you do because I know you're doing a great job on like LinkedIn. You're
Yeah.
crushing it in terms of content creation, but in terms of what kind of sparks that initial like, hey, we got to do something about this. Hey, we need a solution
Mhm.
here. Uh, what are your clients saying before they end up coming to you?
Yeah. So it's usually one of three things. The first one is that someone senior in marketing or sales moves into the organization and sees that there is no voice of the customer data that's kind of coming in, and they kind of want I guess, a bit of a baseline understanding of what's going on in the market. So that's usually kind of like one of the triggers is someone new coming to the organization and saying, I need to understand what's going on, objectively speaking, from the perspective of the buyer, not what I'm being told by the CEO or sales or product or whoever it might be. So that's one I guess uh, one trigger. Another is starting to either lose deals to a single competitor. They're seeing a single competitor come up, which they may or may not have seen before, and starting to get to a critical mass in terms of the numbers of times they're mentioned or the number of deals they're losing to that competitor. Usually that's a trigger for sales or leadership to say, we need to figure out what's going on. Like, why have these people come onto the radar? What are they doing? What are they saying? What are they saying about us? Those types of things. The flip side of that is if there is a dominant player in the market, someone that holds the majority of the market share, the only way to really understand how to start to win back market share is understand why you're winning and losing deals. And if you don't have an understanding of that, you're not going to you're not going to chip away at that market share. So that's like the flip side. There's like the up and comers, these people that are now on our radar, which never used to be. And on the other side, there's the dominant player. We're the up and comers. We need to start winning kind of market share. So that's the second. The third is around trying many things. They've tried many tactics. Some have worked, some haven't, most haven't, and they've been doing this for months, years, and it's got to a point where something needs to change. They can't just keep throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. And I use that that kind of that image of all the time, is because that's what it is, right? If you're just throwing tactics out to see what works without it being grounded anything, you're really just shooting in the dark. Some of it's going to stick, but a lot of it isn't. And I think people get to a point, especially like leadership gets to a point where they say enough's enough. We need to stop guesswork and take a more data-driven approach to figuring out what is actually going to work to improve win rates and revenue.
And the kind of follow-on question that brings up for me is, what do you think that internal teams are kind of struggling with when it comes to really understanding their customers? Because it sounds like when an organization comes to work with you, they've tried a lot of things. They're seeing competitors start to win market share. They're not really sure what their customers are saying about them or why they're not choosing them. And so they say, okay, we need to get some outside help. They come to Josh. But presumably before that point, they have their internal go-to-market teams who are talking to customers, doing some degree of customer research, presumably. And so what do you think the gaps are for those internal go-to-market teams? And I'm not putting any, this is not to say to blame them for what is going wrong, but what do you think, what are their pain points? What are they struggling with? Is it they don't have time, they don't have the tools, they don't have the training, the organization is not set up to integrate research findings well? Like, I guess, what have you seen when you kind of interface with these teams?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a combination of all those things you mentioned. I think the two big ones I see is a lack of time. When you're speaking about product marketers, they have to wear many different hats, and research is just one small part of their roles and responsibilities. You couple that with the idea or the fact that a lot of researchers just don't have a lot of product marketers just don't have research experience. Not to say they can't do research, but there is a hesitation, there is a learning curve that needs to happen, and both those two things combined means that while yes, they can kind of like, I guess, like stitch together a solution and maybe make it work sporadically, the reality is this win-loss research needs to be done over time and pretty regularly over time to be really effective, right? So that you can track changes over time. Yes, there is value in doing it ad hoc, like once off, to kind of get a snapshot of what's going on. But to get the most value out of it, it makes sense to see how are you tracking in terms of the decision drivers to either purchasing or not your solution over time, and how does that compare relative to your competitors as well. And and product marketers just don't have time to do that. It's almost a full-time job in and of itself, especially if you don't know and don't have the systems in place to be able to um, recruit people, manage calendars, pay incentives, conduct interviews themselves, transcribe, do synthesis, prepare findings. It is a very involved process. It's not just the 30-minute conversation that happens with the prospects. For every 30-minute conversation you have with the prospects, there's probably an hour of work that kind of goes into an hour of extra work that goes into it. So, and I don't think a lot of product marketers and people in general understand what goes into kind of customer research. And yes, many kind of try, some succeed, many don't, for that very reason. And so that's where there's value in bringing in someone who has done this for uh, years, because they have those systems in place. Yes, there is still a learning curve in terms of like, what does your product do? How do people speak about it? But the systems are in place to expedite that process in a way that's you're going to get to results much quicker, but also the results themselves are going to be better by virtue of the fact that the person conducting those interviews is asking the right types of questions in the right way and analyzing the data as unbiased and impartial as possible. And I mentioned impartial, and I forgot to kind of talk about this as well, especially with win-loss interviews and especially with loss interviews. You can imagine a prospect would probably feel quite hesitant with speaking with someone from the organization which they essentially rejected, right? There's the product marketer, although is kind of somewhat impartial, is not entirely impartial. And the prospect's probably going to feel a little bit hesitant speaking even to them, even though they never spoke to them as part of the sales process. Whereas an independent third party is able to be a lot more impartial in those conversations. And so that's another reason why I think a company would choose to outsource the research to someone like me, is because they can be both impartial and unbiased in a way that someone internally just can't.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know from experience, anytime you're super close to the business, the product, the marketing program, the closer you are, the harder it gets to honestly evaluate, what's working, what's not, unless you're purely looking at data. But when it comes to judgment calls and things like that, it's really hard when you're super close to it and you want to see it succeed. And so it makes total sense that you would bring in, a third party who hasn't spent years building the product or hasn't put the last 9 months into building the marketing program, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I couldn't give it. I don't take this the wrong way, but I don't really care, or I don't really give a shit what the prospects say to me. Right? They're not going to hurt my feelings. It's not my baby, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing from a data quality perspective, is that they're going to give me their as close to unfiltered, hopefully, feedback as they're willing to give. So, and that's what you want. You want the good and the bad, because if you don't, then you're going to make a lot of costly decisions.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, I want to ask one more question about kind of internal organizational research, and then I want to talk a little bit about your research kind of process. Um, so you mentioned at the beginning of your answer that a lot of times you see organizations kind of doing ad hoc research. Sometimes like maybe they have some of the tools or some of the knowledge to do the research, but they do it once a quarter. I feel like this is almost a meme on like LinkedIn among researchers where the frequency of it's like we do research all the time, and they did like 3 customer interviews over the course of a year or whatever. So I'm not asking you to problem solve this for every business in the world because it's a big problem to solve. But what would your recommendation be if organizations were trying to get serious about doing research with their customers on a consistent basis, and you could kind of, I don't know, wave your magic wand. The answer could be, hey, you should come hire me, and I'll just you can outsource it all to me. That could be a good answer. But is there anything they could do internally? Does it just mean it could be hiring more research specific roles? It
Mm,
could be kind of changing some of the organization structure. I'm just curious what kind of your perspective, especially as kind of on the outside looking in to some of these
mm.
organizations.
It's a really good question I get often around like how does one get buy-in for research is a huge question that I get. It's all around, to me, like shifting perspectives, and that can happen in a number of ways. Firstly, kind of stop talking about research and start talking about outcomes, right? No one research in and of itself isn't really valuable. It's the outcomes that it kind of enables, which is the most valuable thing. And so, while yes, we do research as researchers, um, put it aside for the moment and start speaking, I guess, the language of business. Align your research to critical business goals. Where are there gaps in your understanding? If you can do that, then research is just a vehicle to get you from unknown uh, to uh, to clarity, essentially. And so I think that's a really people fall into the trap of just talking about we're going to do research. Um, I like to always ask, what is it that you're trying to solve? What's kind of mission critical right now in the business? And then work backwards to see how research can help them achieve that goal. If you start speaking that, people are going to sit up because who doesn't want to hit whatever KPI they've got? And so I think that's a big part of it. So do that. Then once you've identified what are those, I guess, critical business questions that need to be answered, then figure out, okay, what is the smallest bit of research that we can do that's going to deliver value. Don't try and sell in the 2, 3, 4, 5 ongoing, 4 or 5 month or ongoing research project because no one's going to buy that straight away, especially if you've never done research before. But if you can show in a couple of weeks the value that you can provide by doing research, then you're going to increase the likelihood of getting buy-in to making that an ongoing, I guess, program. So identify the critical business goals, the gaps in your knowledge, and then chew off the smallest piece of research that you can that's going to deliver value towards those goals. And then what I also like to do is call out what is the cost of ignorance. So if we were to continue on the path we're going down now without research, what does that look like? Highlight that state, that current state. Then juxtapose that with the what if we were to have this data? What does that potentially look like? And if you look at those two scenarios side by side, one is far more compelling than the other. And I'll kind of leave it up to you to figure out which one that is. And so when you do those things, it becomes very hard to say no to doing research, especially when you're not talking about research being the thing that you do. It's answering critical business questions by providing clarity and data, essentially.
Oh, sorry about that. I feel like everyone watching, especially in the research field, are taking notes right now. This is like how to get buy-in 101 with Josh. So this is a really really good insights there. And what kind of stands out to me about that is it's essentially mirroring like the kind of marketing playbook, which is don't sell features, sell outcomes, right? Sell solutions, sell
Yeah,
um, don't sell the t-shirt, sell the lifestyle, these kind of things. So uh, yeah, it makes total sense when you're trying to sell a business on the idea of research. It's like, well, don't talk about the methodology or we're going to do this many interviews or this or that. Talk about, well, what can you do with it, right? Um, it's something we've seen just in the as we've been developing our product, like um, giving a layer of information is good, but giving people insights and helping them connect what the research says to the problem they're trying to solve is great. And I
yeah,
think that is, really the goal of any good research project. Um, so I wanted to kind of as a last topic here, I just wanted to hear a little bit more about your kind of process. And we talked about some of the struggles that internal marketing teams could have, sales teams could have. But when it comes to you in your work, I guess what are
mm,
some of the challenges that you see within qualitative research generally, or
mm.
maybe even just broaden that out and say customer research in general? Are there things that you see that others are doing that you say, oh, actually, there are some pitfalls that I'm seeing kind of broadly in the customer research space, and here's what I do differently? Or are there things that you kind of see in your day to day where you're like, hey, you know what? It's still a struggle to for every 30-minute interview, it's 2 hours of work on the other end.
Mm.
You know, maybe that's the reality. I'd just love to hear kind of from your perspective, what's, yeah, easy to hard.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Good question. For me, look, I'm an independent researcher. I typically don't do research with a co-pilot, so to speak, or someone else. Um, Now, I find that I probably do my best analysis when I'm doing it with someone else. Um, so that's, I guess, a decision I've made, a very conscious decision I've made. But there are increasingly tools that act as I guess, a co-pilot when I don't have a human. ChatGPT, AI in general, is one of those tools. Really, just to kind of, I guess, in a way, bounce ideas off, get different perspectives, and that's what working with someone else in that stage of research analysis provides is a sounding board, a way to kind of like challenge your biases, and I guess like shift your perspective. When you're doing that in isolation, that's very hard to do. You've kind of got your echo chamber that's kind of going on in your mind, which yes, for sure, you can get to some great insights, but I think the quality and it's almost like some of the nuances within that is a lot harder to get when you're doing it by yourself. Not to say it can't be done, just more difficult. Now, going back to the AI side of things, I think there is a huge opportunity to leverage ChatGPT or any of these other platforms to help with that research. Yes, you have to think about customer data privacy for sure, but using it as a sounding board, using it as a starting point, using it in many different ways to help, especially if you're by yourself conducting research, is a great way to not only speed up synthesis, but for in my case, what I use it for is to increase the quality of the synthesis. Um, and so there are prompts that I use. There are, I'm sure there are GPTs out there as well now that you can use, but I would urge you to start to play around with any of these tools. Be responsible, of course, to help with your analysis, because there is huge power in shifting your own perspective, and challenging some of the biases, inherent biases that you have that might not be um, immediately obvious if you're doing it by yourself.
Yeah, that's it's super interesting to hear. I actually had a question about AI on my list for you, but we kind of nailed it just with that question. Yeah, it's super interesting to hear from you how you see AI almost as like it's almost like a research companion or research kind of assistant's not quite the right word. It's a sounding board, like you said. It's something that gets you out of just your sole perspective, where you're just kind of in your head and maybe you have a preconceived notions, a pre-existing set of biases, whatever, and it just kind of helps you come up with different or kind of maybe some ideas out of left field that you wouldn't have considered otherwise.
Yeah,
Um, I've heard of people using it for more kind of rote, like things like data, like cleaning data sets, right? Like going through and validating like responses to an open survey or something like that. But you're kind of over here on the other end of the spectrum where you're using it more of a as a kind of conversational research companion, something like that. And
yeah. I
that's
mean,
super
look,
interesting to me.
yeah. Look, that's how I use it in general. Like that's how if I reflect on how I use ChatGPT is as a, I guess, an ideation tool, I suppose you can call it, a way
That's
to get me from um, go from 0 to 1. I find that I struggle sometimes to get from 0 to 1 to get the gears going. But once I get started, that's when I'm able to start generating momentum. And if you can have some assistance in going from 0 to 1, I find it's much easier to generate that momentum. At least from my perspective. So in general, that's how I use ChatGPT, research or otherwise. I just find that it's quite useful in getting that process going, but then also when I do get stuck, kind of using it as a sounding board. And if you were to see some of my conversation with this ChatGPT, it is very much like it's back and forwards. Like um, it's kind of weird it's almost like speaking to a friend, but that's how I use it, right? And that's, I guess, like how the co-pilot concept comes in, because it feels like that.
Yeah, that's it doesn't sound weird at all because I do the same thing. I go back and forth and say, yeah, I understand that, but what about this idea over here? And
Yeah,
it's just like if you can treat it like a partner in whatever you're doing, with the understanding that it's not perfect, it's not going to give you all the answers, but I actually increasingly feel like its job isn't really to give you all the answers in a certain way; it's to help you arrive at the answers better for yourself. Um,
yeah, 100%.
yeah.
100%.
Um,
But I'm not looking for it to kind of provide the 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 insight. It's more as a way to kind of unlock my own thinking. I think you've hit the nail on the head with that summary.
awesome. So we're coming up on time here. So, as kind of a last question here, can you just tell folks where they can find you online? So I know the way I came across you on LinkedIn is you're producing a ton of great content there. But please just tell us, where can folks go to connect with you, to learn about your work, anything like that.
Yeah, yeah. So LinkedIn's probably the best place you can find me. So it's just Joshua Fryszer, spelled Fryzer, or you can hit me up at Josh at AHA Research, and that AHA is spelled AHA research.io. Either of those places, yeah, is where you can find me.
Awesome. I would highly recommend people give you a follow on LinkedIn. Tons of great content around customer research, win loss. I know product marketers should be all over your content as well. So, Josh, thank you so much for being here with us today. I had an awesome time talking to you, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, right back at you, Zach. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Love what you're doing over at Reveal AI. So keep up the good work.
Cool. Thanks.